Welcome to the supply and demand lecture topic, and we're going to get started right away on this. So let's first talk about the market economy. So the market economy is a type of economic system, and this economic system, like any economic system, has to answer three fundamental questions: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Um, you can't survive as a society without having a systematic way of answering those questions. And the free market economy tries to answer those questions, but its selling point, or the thing that it's supposed to do, and I stress supposed to do, there's no guarantee that it'll do it, but what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to be more efficient than other economic systems. In other words, it is supposed to make better use of the inputs, the factors of production, than other types of economic systems. So, with that in mind, you now have a way of clearly identifying market failure. Market failure is when the market system doesn't do what it's supposed to do. If there are economic systems that are more efficient than the market system, then the market system has failed. The other thing to understand too is um, society does not always look at efficiency as the number one priority. So sometimes society will purposely interfere with market outcomes to try to achieve a different type of goal other than efficiency. And that's perfectly fine. So let's just go back to the theoretical selling point, which is efficiency. And when we talk about efficiency, you have to also understand efficiency is really separated into two parts. There's productive efficiency, which is maximum output with the least amount of input. And then there's allocative efficiency. Allocative efficiency is producing the optimal mix of output, or in other words, producing what people want. You need both types of efficiency to be truly efficient. So when we talk about efficiency, we're really talking about two efficiencies combined. If you fail at one, if you fail at either productive or allocative efficiency, you are not efficient at all. So when it comes to efficiency, how does a free market system achieve a higher level of efficiency than other economic systems? Well, communication and competition. If the market participants have an effective way of communicating, you can achieve a higher level of allocative efficiency than other economic systems. If the producers of the output compete for resources, compete for customers, there's an incentive to be productively efficient, keeping your costs down. So whenever there is an enhancement of communication or competition, efficiency tends to go up. So we're focusing on supply and demand, and supply and demand is all about communication. So after studying supply and demand, you should be able to understand how supply and demand is an example of communication, and how communication leads to a more efficient, allocatively efficient outcome. So when we talk about supply and demand in the free market, we're really talking about supply and demand in two different markets. One, I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit. When we talk about supply and demand, there's got to be a supplier and there's got to be a demander. And that supplier or demander, the role that is played in supply, the role that is played in demand, will be played by one of four actors in the free market system. Either consumers, sometimes consumers are called households, businesses, the government, or foreigners. These are going to be either the suppliers or demanders. Now, let's focus our attention on consumers and businesses. Consumer, are they a supplier or demander? Businesses, are they a supplier or demander? Well, their particular role as a supplier or demander will depend upon what market we're talking about. And when we talk about markets in the free market, there's really two. There's the factors market. That's where factors of production are bought and sold. These are the inputs needed to produce things. And then there's the product market. This is when the product is produced and brought to market for final consumption. So there's supply and demand in this market, and there's supply and demand in this market. And in this market, consumers are the supplier. They supply their labor. And the firms are the demanders. They need factors of production to produce things. When we go into the product market, the roles reverse. The consumers are the demanders of the goods and services in the market, and the firms are the suppliers. So what role is played depends upon which market you're talking about. So we could try to visualize this. Here's the product market, here's the factors market, and here are the two market participants. They get together in these two markets and interact. And you could see that the interaction has this kind of what we call a circular flow. And what you see here is the outer circle flows in one direction. And what is flowing? Either goods and services or factors of production. And the inner circle, money. And so there's supply and demand in each market. We're going to be focusing most of our attention here. Now, that does not mean that this market is more important than this market. It's just for the limitations of time, we'll just be focusing on the supply and demand elements here, but the same type of principles will work just as well in the factors market. Now, from an ecological point of view, one of the criticisms made of this circular flow diagram is it does not show the complete picture. This activity taking place is taking place in a broader market, a broader environment. And you could see that, we could call that broader environment the ecosystem. And the economy is a subset of the ecosystem. And the economy has got to draw matter and energy from the planet. And one of the points made in your daily text is that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed in a closed system. And that has an effect on economic growth in the long run. And so what the daily text draws from is the laws of thermodynamics. In a closed system like this, you see that we've got a closed system, matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So you can't make something from nothing. You've got to work with what you have. And secondly, these closed systems tend to go from an orderly state to a disorderly state. And these two laws kind of say something about future growth, meaning future growth cannot be sustained at a very high level because of the fact that we live in a closed system. So let's go back to our talk about supply and demand. And what we're going to do is, when we talk about supply and demand, there's got to be a buyer, and there's got to be a seller, a supplier, and a demander. And demand is really more of a survey. It's a reflection of intentions by demanders. And in order to be part of the survey, you've got to have the ability and willingness to demand a particular good at different prices. So basically what it is you're asked, how much are you able and willing to buy at this price? You log it in. Then you ask, how much are you able and willing at a different price? And basically, you take this information and you create something called a demand curve. And we could see this happening right here. Here are the different prices. And here are the quantities demanded at these different prices. And you could log this information in and create yourself a demand curve. So in our next video, we're going to be talking about what happens when prices change and what happens to the movement along this curve and what happens when things change that have nothing to do with price but are important to consumers. What happens to this curve? So that's going to be our talk for the next portion of this series.